Reading and writing, getting immersed in the arts is an old-fashioned, primitive way for humans to feel like they are a part of something bigger, to get engaged, to become connected to something. The data shows that being creative in reading and writing is on the decline, and that correlates with us feeling less socially connected than ever. Today I bring on author, poet, Mr. Joseph Fasano to talk to us today about whether or not the immersing in arts or reading and writing is lost forever, or do we still have a chance to keep this viable medium alive? Join me. This is the Better Mental Health for Kids and Parents podcast. All right, everybody, welcome back. This is episode 47, Reading and Writing. I am your host, Dr. Christopher Fasano, and this is the Better Mental Health for Kids and Parents podcast. Now, in this podcast, we discuss all of the relevant mental health topics and how they affect our youth and those that care for them. So we have 46 episodes now live. You can get all of those episodes at mentalstrongkids.com. That's mentalstrongkids.com. In addition to podcast episodes, we do have articles that we put up there when we hear things that are relevant for you guys to learn about, things in the news, things that are trending, things related to anything mental health. And the focus really on this show is to kind of make sure we are talking about mental health in a way that's just as important as physical health. And the earlier you can, provide that information to people, humans, when they're young, the more likely they're going to be more stable and have an ability to be emotionally intelligent and recognize when they're feeling off. And when they can recognize that, then presumably the next step is that they can talk about it. And when you talk about it, that's when everything happens, right? Because it's when you keep it in and you build up, that's where the problems happen. So that's what this show aims to do, and I appreciate all of you who have joined me on this journey. We're coming up on 1 year from when we started our first show back in October. And as we are recording this show, it was just the first day of fall. So we have season change. I love fall. It's one of my favorite times of year. So thank you guys again for the continued support. And I appreciate you really letting me know what you want to hear. And that really, really helps me to come up with good topics. So today we're closing out Suicide Awareness Month. It's been a really great month. And I've tried to bring guests on this month to talk to us about just different things with this backdrop of suicide awareness. I haven't really gotten, I didn't want to do episodes heavy on suicide all month, but I wanted to take these little topics that sort of can play into that. Like, for example, today, we're going to be talking about, the title is Reading and Writing, or the arts. And you might not think, that is related to suicide, but the connection there is that when humans feel like they're not connected to society, or they feel lonely, or they feel like they're not a part of something, that is when it can lead them down a bad road or a dark road into depression, feeling like you're removed and suicidal and have suicide ideations. So it's not that reading and writing directly correlate to suicide, but people that aren't engaged or don't feel like they have something that they're a part of or something that gives them some sort of, good feeling can become depressed. And anyone who's prone to depression, it can exacerbate that. So today, I wanted to explore this topic because the data does show that reading and writing and arts is on the decline. And what is happening there? Reading has been a primitive way humans have sort of, educated themselves, kind of got engaged, pick up a book and really get into it. Makes you feel like you're a part of something, allows you to use your creative brain and think about things in different ways. All of that helps us feel like we're doing something and having passion for something. And the fact that we might be losing that is not a good thing. So I wanted to explore that today. And so to do that, I'm bringing on an author, a poet. He's a teacher. He happens to be my cousin. And he's going to talk to us about his field. He teaches kids and he writes for a living. So he's in this world. And so we'll get his take on why he feels like the arts and reading and writing is important and how it can be beneficial for kids. And, we'll get into all of that sort of discussion. All right. So mentalstrongkids.com, guys, check it out. The Instagram handle is at mentalstrong. All right. So before I begin, I want to just touch on a couple of statistics and then we'll bring Joe on. There was this study reading, it was an article in the Washington Post by Christopher Ingram. This was back in 2018, so presumably it's gotten worse. And it starts off by saying the share of Americans who read for pleasure on any given day has significantly fallen by more than 30% since 2004, okay? So it says 2004, about 28% of Americans age 15 and older read for pleasure on any given day. And last year, that was 2017, that number was about 18%, okay? So if you think about this in terms of time reading per day, it's fallen from about around 25 minutes per person per day in 2004 to about 17 minutes per person per day in 2017, okay? Now, it says that the results are more stark, they're more significant amongst men, and the younger the human, the less likely they are to read. The older you are, the more likely you are to read, which just illustrates a generational sort of trend, which would make sense, right? And when they go through here, and this isn't an attack on anything, this is just putting the stats out to sort of contextualize the conversation Joe and I are going to have. But we talk about a lot these tablets and technology, and Joe and I are going to talk about that. Well, really, the correlation, what they say is that reading has gone down and TV time consumption has gone up. So we've it's not that we're, sitting there sulking lonely, but we've sort of replaced our engagement time or our time engaging with things. We've replaced reading with the television. It's a different sort of engagement. And one will argue, I'm sure Joe could make a good argument, that there's a different sort of stimulation when you're reading. When you're reading a book or you're reading something and it's creative, you're using a lot more brain power. That requires a lot of brain activity. When you're watching a television show, it requires minimal brain activity. I don't know if people really understand that, but when you're watching something, your brain is not as cognitively active, meaning it's not trying to figure things out. It's not using different parts of the brain as much as it is when it's reading, because reading requires you to use creative thought. It requires you to place yourself there, to imagine. And when you're being creative, you're using more of your cognitive abilities. And that has a lot of benefit with humans. It not only has a lot of benefit with young people, but it has tremendous benefit for adults and for seniors. The longer you can read, the longer you will live. This is a fact. I have a 90-year-old grandmother who continues to read books, current books. She'll go through a book every 2 weeks. And when you talk to her, it's like talking to a regular human. She's very with it, and cognitively, she's held pretty well. And I'm certain that has to do with reading. Reading keeps you sharp. It keeps you engaged. And with children and kids, if they can get into reading, it also gives them something to do. It gives them an out. If they feel like they got nothing going on, or they're on Facebook or Instagram and they can't deal, they can retreat back to their room, pick up a book, and start to go to a place that maybe they can't get to. And I think that's really what the importance of reading is. And that's what I want to talk to Joe about today. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Joe on, and we're going to talk about reading, writing, and the arts. And I look forward to hearing your feedback from this interview. All right, so on today's show, I have a very special guest to discuss this topic. We've been talking about a lot, kids and young adults feeling sort of disconnected. And, on this show in particular, we're going to touch on what happened or what's going on with reading, and writing, engaging in the arts, and sort of the willingness of kids and young adults to pick up a book and just get more engaged. And I say that my guest is special, obviously because of his talents and accomplishments, but most importantly because he's of my blood. So that makes him a little more special. He's my first cousin. He's the son of my father's brother, Mr. Joseph Fasano, and I've known Joe obviously my whole life. I've watched him grow as a human and his career from its beginning. A little bit about that, and then we'll bring Joe on. He got a bachelor's from Harvard and a master's from Columbia. He's currently I'm going to get into. He's obviously a functioning and an accomplished in writing and a poet and a writer, but he also teaches. He's an adjunct professor at Columbia School of Arts. And, like I said, in addition to this, he is an accomplished published poet. Just read you a couple things here. His poem Mailer in New York, which I urge everyone to read. It was now in 2008, I think, right, Joe? Joe will have to correct me if I'm wrong on that, or it was earlier. I'll find out from him. But it definitely was awarded the Rattle Poetry Prize in that time. It's been a finalist for a bunch of others, the Missouri Review Editors Prize, the Times Literary Supplement Poetry Competition, among others. His poems have appeared in places where you want poems to appear: Yale Review, Southern Review, The Field, etc. He's put out 4 books, collection of poems, with The Crossing is most recent. That was in 2018, late 2018. And he has a new novel coming, which we're just talking about the title, The Dark Heart of Every Wild Thing, which I think is a fantastic title, especially for a movie. You can find all things Joseph Fasano at josephfasano.net. You can order copies. You can check him out. It's my honor and privilege to welcome you, Joey. What's up, Joseph Fasano? Welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Chris.
All right, man. You got a lot of stuff for me to talk about. And I've been trying to get Joe to come on in this context. We always talk about Joe. Like, Joe and I always have these random conversations when we meet up. Nowadays we meet up. It's short lived, right? We only got a few minutes, but we come together frequently over a conserved topic, and that is a lot of time about engagement, communication, interaction. Joe and I are very similar in that, we like to engage with people and things and get into it and really understand it. And I feel like that's something on this show with kids is we're losing. So let's start here, Joe. You're obviously a literature guy. You're a book guy, right? One would argue, though, that you're maybe an extreme of this, but I want to tell the audience, and even for me too, like, did you always love books? Like, was it always your thing? Like, how did you gravitate towards the arts? Like, walk us through your evolution with a book.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny because, as you know, the family we came from, which is everybody. I feel like everybody has their passions that maybe run in different directions. So I didn't really grow up, as you know, surrounded by books, by texts in the home.
No, we weren't reviewing the literature on Sundays.
It wasn't. No, it was more reviewing grandma's pasta,
right?
And figuring out and always giving it an A+.
Right.
But yeah, the short answer is yes. I was always drawn to this kind of mysterious and magical thing that language can do. It took me quite a long time, comparatively speaking, to figure out, exactly the way in which I felt called to try to make something in that realm.
Mm-hmm.
But, before I tried to make anything, I just wanted to receive it. So I was reading poems, I was reading novels, I was reading short stories, and just feeling like that provided a kind of nourishment that really is absolutely essential, at least was essential and is essential to me. And that's something, like you're talking about. I think that as a teacher as well, I see that in my students. I teach some grad students who are about my age. And then I have my youngest students are freshmen in college, 17, 18 years old. And I certainly see in them this thirst. There's this ancient thirst for the kind of communication, the kind of communion that, whether it's a poem or a work of fiction, that things like that can really provide. And so, we have a lot of things distracting for the attention of young people now. I don't tend to think of it as apocalyptic. Social media, for example, can be great. We're going to use it right now.
Right.
But there's just a way in which I see it in the eyes of my students. There's something maybe missing. Now, I don't know that literature can give you all of that.
But you know what, Joe, on that point, before we lose it, some would argue, though, that me and you and I can say this because we grew up at a time where we didn't have it, and we've learned to utilize it, but after we've learned how to be a human being. So someone would argue, like, these kids, you're a freshman in college. It's a good transition to these kids. These kids, they didn't grow up without a device or a computer. They were born with one, right? That's all they've ever known. We didn't know that. So we had a mechanism to always come back to. We do have old brains conserved, but the technology has been different. So I hear you. I don't think it's apocalyptic, but I do think it provides an easy out, right? An easy out. Yeah. So what I want to ask, it's a good thing to ask you. With these kids, like, talk to me about the trends you've been teaching for a while now. have you seen like their ability to engage literature, read a book, magazine over time? The studies are show a decline. Do you see that? Like, is it tangible to you, or is it in your sort of sample sizes? It's really not that bad with
It's a
the
great
younger kids, obviously.
No, it's a great question, and I would say, I mean, it sounds like a little bit of a cop out. I would say yes and no. I've had about 2,000 students of that 17, 18, 19-year-old age range over my 12 years of teaching, and it reminds me of there's that anecdote that David Foster Wallace, the writer David Foster Wallace, tells at the beginning of his Kenyon College speech. This is water, and he says, something to the effect of, an old fish swims by two young fish and says, "How's the water? How's the water?" And the young fish swim by and they say, "What the hell is water?" It's exactly that idea that the generation maybe below ours, we're in our late 30s. The generation below ours or after ours was raised in this sort of matrix. That's the system in which they were raised. That said, yes, of course I do. I see. The other day I walked into one of my classes. My students they're new to college. They're in a new environment. They might otherwise have been socializing with one another. They're waiting for class to begin. I'm preparing my lecture notes. And each one of them is in his or her own kind of solipsistic universe on the phone rather than reaching out and talking to one another. That said, and I have done this before, one of my classes I teach is first year writing and rhetoric and communication. When I engage them and I say, because it's about critical thinking in an era where they're bombarded with more. I feel for them, really. Right. Bombarded by on a daily basis. We're bombarded by more information, than probably the human mind is designed to process. So I give them an opportunity to talk about that. I say, do you want to talk about social media? Do you want to talk about its role in your life? And to a person, even the silent ones in the group, they want to talk about it. They actually, many of them, want to put the phones away. They want to view this environment that we're in as a kind of space where they're given permission to take a break.
Right.
I think 5 or 6 years ago, maybe it wasn't like that because it was so new and
it was still fresh for them. Like it was still exciting. Yeah. The studies show that, dude. Like the studies show. They've done these interesting studies where they've done samplings in colleges and they have groups and cohorts where they take the phone and they track their mental health or their indicators. And the data will show that like they do better without. They feel better. They get more sleep. They feel like more fulfilled. So I guess that's the answer. Like you see it. Like it's not all lost in these young kids. Like they might be
there.
It's there. Yeah.
It's there. And there's a part of me. I mean, I would be writing no matter what because it's what I have to do. I feel that I need to do it. But of course, there is a part of me and there's a part of any writer, I think, that is going to think, well, for whom are you writing? And where is the audience going to be if people are going to get lost in these other realms? And that's why I say I don't have a pessimism about that. I think that, poetry, for one thing, it's the primal word spoken into the abyss. It's always there. And there's a part of our, unless we entirely change our constitutions as biological creatures, we need that. We need that kind of the form of it, the music of it, the content of it, and literature as a whole. So no, it's tough to articulate and it's tough to summarize and reduce because literature avoids reduction. Right. But I do see that when it is presented to people maybe who haven't had a lot of experience in it, there's a kind of reawakening. Right. Like you can see it, and that must be a cool thing. That must be a cool thing to see come alive. Oh, it's kind of like me as a developmental neuroscientist watching a baby go from baby to human. You see it in real time, like it responds, and you're like, holy like wow, like that's awesome. Like that's probably as a teacher what everybody wants to see. You have that moment where you're like, you see, like it's definitely still there. I mean, that's a really cool thing. You brought up a good point. This is sort of like a little bit of a tangent, but related. Talk about connectedness, but even more so, to have the ability to engage in communication and conversation and reading and understanding in an era where there's so much info thrown at you. I feel like kids nowadays, younger, even adults, you have to be able to dissect and be able to understand what's good, what's true, what's not, right? What's real, because there's so much out there. You'll fall victim to it. People fall in their silos. And I feel like it's just a product of people not really wanting to take the time. But that's also why it's important to continue to have conversations and feel like you're involved, because
debate, healthy discourse, like all of that stuff. It can't disappear. Otherwise, people are going to be, we're going to have like a controlled situation, you know? Like I keep forgetting
Yeah.
about that.
I think that's right. First thing I say to my students, or at least I said this year to my first year students, is, you know, critical thinking sounds like a very in the classroom kind of buzzword. But really it amounts to thinking about, with all this data that's coming at you on a daily basis, hourly basis, minute by minute basis, how do you know which thoughts in your own mind are even yours, right? I mean, how do you know what thoughts that are, you know,
Right.
somehow part of your matrix of thinking? You know, how do you know which of them are yours? How do you know where you begin in the world? And so it's very tricky. I don't have the answers to that, but
Yeah,
what
it's
we try
tough.
to, yeah, but what we try to do, and I think I always say to myself and then to my students and others, you know, as long as you're doing the conversation right with yourself and you're thinking about it, you know, you might not fall into the quicksand. But yeah, it's it's really essential.
It's just another area of why it's important. You know, what about, are you a purist in reading and writing? In other words, like, you know, they've done things to make reading more cool or accessible, like the Nook or the iPad and the tablet and that kind of stuff. How do you feel about those? And the reason why I'm asking is because, like, sometimes, you know, you got to kind of meet in the middle with these younger people. And like, if it's forcing them to digest and sort of still engage, are you okay with that? Or are you a purist and be like, absolutely not? There's something to pick. I believe there is something to picking up a book. But I mean, where do you sit with that concept?
Well, I think it's complicated because, you know, I will read some things on screens, but there is something about this question. We can get in depth with it, but we'll just sort of touch the surface, which is to say, it depends what kind of screen you're reading on. So that is to say, if I'm reading, if I publish a poem and it comes out online,
Right.
and, you know, maybe it reaches more people than it would have reached if 10, 15 years ago I had published a piece in the print edition of the Southern Review. I think both of those things can be beautiful and wonderful. The thing is, if you're reading it, let's say on a computer, you kind of are in this state of mind that at any moment a distraction might come.
Right. You're like anticipating click
Yeah.
off. Yeah.
Or is there going to be an advertisement that's
Right.
curated based on your
Right.
search history on
Right.
the side of the screen? So that's just different. That's a different space. And in terms of poetry, poetry is largely about the silences around the language. And so if you are not really having those, or if those silences are different or inflected differently, then that changes it. You know, that said, I think there is, you know, again, I think there is a great, a lot of these tools can be used wonderfully, and they are used wonderfully. But, you know, there was one study recently, and I'm not going to cite it because I can't recall, but that indicated that even young people really do enjoy the artifact of the book. So whether it's the book or something they can touch with their hands, you know, Hegel talks about the idea of having that sort of privilege of being able to touch something with your hands. There's really something about that. And I think the idea of a digital space as maybe not being as intimate, again, is still clicking into some ancient part in us that is still there. So, you know, I don't know.
I agree with that, dude. I really do. I think that there's a feeling you get from sitting with something in your hands, and you're going. You typically, with a book, you retreat somewhere. You know, you don't pick up a book in the middle of a crowded kitchen. You typically pick up a book and go, and you seek shelter and a quiet. And I think that is the preserve.
That's the word. That's the word, is quiet.
Right. It's supposed to be quiet when you're picking up a book, whereas when you're on the computer, yes, you can consume the same poem, but your brain is anticipatory. Like, responses are, when is my email going to come? Because all it knows is that. So it's an interesting take on it. And I think the middle ground is my last question, and before we move on a little bit, was like, what do you, if like there are parents or people who are trying to get people more engaged in reading, do you have any like sort of like strategies for them? Is it simple as, like, I always like tell my kid, like, read something you like, you know, like, well, it doesn't, right?
That's what I would say for parents, and you know, I don't know because I'm not a parent myself, but I can imagine it, and I can imagine you know, what I would want for even to have happened to my students 10 years before they get to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Is to have it around. I mean, you know, just have it around, and it's there for someone to pick up and find and explore on their own. But I also think it's just really important to read to young people, and not just, you know, to have them bombarded with the kinds of sounds that they hear on a daily basis, whether it's the news that's on in the background, or, you know, what is the noise that they're hearing, or us arguing with one another. All of that is real. All of that is part of their environment. But what about the use of language as it is used in a literary sense to cultivate and reveal the musicality in it, for example. That is everything to do when we think of the musicality of language. That's about the body. That's about the heartbeat. That's about some very real ancient things in us. So I think, even though a very young person might not fathom it on a conscious level, I think to engage young people on the level of reading them poetry, reading them literature, reading them language that is committed to its use as a musical artifact.
Right. I think, you know what? I think people are afraid to do that. I know that I could be and would have been until I got a little bit older, is that they don't understand it, or like it's too much for them. So therefore, how am I going to articulate something to my kid or to a friend or to somebody when I don't really know what it is? But I think that's exactly what you're trying to show them, right? That's the beauty in it. Like, you might find something in it that you like or that resonates with you, and I might find something else. That's okay.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to understand love to love somebody. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's a part of it. You can pass these
it's just
things on.
It's there for you. It somehow speaks to you. Yeah, I love that. So I have limited time with Joe, and I want to get to this topic before we close. You look at the time; it's already been 25 minutes in. This is what happens when Joe and I have conversations. It can go that way. But I want to, in the background of this Suicide Awareness Month, and mental health is one of the obviously the major topics of this show, and we talked about how this relates. The idea of reading and connecting, but so more related, less tangent. I believe it was 2008, right? Vincent Joe published. Yeah. Was it, or was it published earlier than that? Tell me.
It came out. The event that it's based on happened then, and then it came out years later. It came out in
2015. Okay, so Joe. So there was a book. I'm going to let him talk about it in a minute, but I was telling Joe, he sent me the manuscript of it a while back. So the name of the book is called Vincent. And again, I urge you guys, you got to check this out. And it tells the story. You know what, Joe? I'm going to let Joe tell them about what the premise of the book is, and then the event that it's based on, and we can talk about it a little bit.
Sure. No, I'm happy to. It's there was an event. I call it one of the most horrific things that happened in the most banal of circumstances, which is to say there was a man by the name of Vince Lee in Canada in 2008 who had, what was described as a psychotic break. And he was on a Greyhound bus, and
full of people.
And, I won't get graphic, but he killed the person in the seat behind him, and CTV News, the seat beside him. And CTV News described it as a random act of violence. And that little phrase somehow got me thinking, these things that are terrible and traumatic or whatever they might be, and that look random, they are random on some level from the outside. What is going on internally in that person's mind? So perhaps in a very naive and crazy and strange impulse that I just followed, I decided to begin to write in a character who was sort of a version. I don't presume that it is this person, but a version of a character like the person who committed this act. And so I spent several years doing it, and I wrote a book-length poem that I entitled Vincent, from the perspective of this perpetrator. And I in that book did not try to justify anything, did not try to comment on the justice system. This is really about the act of literature of trying to cross that infinite gap between subjectivities and try to inhabit or fathom or understand the life of another person, the inner workings of another person, with all of its inheritances and images and archetypes. And so, that book, you got some pushback from it. I did because there's a resistance. I think people, when you do what is seen as humanizing somebody, seen as responsible
he's
for
sick. That sick guy. Why would you bring attention to it?
Right. It's not only bring attention, but it's easier to sort of tuck that person away. And of course, what ended up happening is, Canada's justice system works differently from ours, and I won't comment on that right now. But he was found not criminally responsible, so he was put in a center for to get some help, some rehabilitation, medication, otherwise. And actually now he has since changed his name, and he is out. He is a free man. That is seen by some people as a tremendous threat to their safety. I can understand what the victim's family must feel, which is to say there are a lot of moving pieces here. But generally, yes, there has been a real kind of pushback against any attempt to try to humanize or find the human voice in a situation. It comes back to what you're saying, that people can't really understand, because at the core of that, there is nothing, to be really understood. It's
Right. I think that's the problem. It's like it's rationalizing the irrational. This happens a lot, and I feel like it's not done well enough with mental health. You know what's crazy? I know. Tell me if it's changed, because I remember the manuscript, Joe. But there was a line, and I believe it was in the beginning, that said, So the concept is Joseph is sort of telling us the story, not necessarily the direct story, but something maybe similar from the perspective of this person who is presumably in a state of mind that is altered and not of what we would consider, in quotes, the normal. And I believe you said something like, it was so easy, it was like dropping a key in bathwater. I believe.
Yeah, that's a good memory.
Is that right?
Is that right? I sent that draft to you years and years ago. That's right. Yeah.
And if you think about that, right? Think about that. Somebody saying that, describing a horrible event. Joe didn't say that the person decapitated someone else. So I'm saying that because you see that for its face value. No pun. I didn't mean to do that. But you see it for its value, and you say, "Oh my God, that is awful," which it is, and it's terrible, which it is. I can't believe somebody would do that, and it always comes to that, or they must be sick. And the answer is yes. Yes. If you can do that, and in your words, if it's so easy, like dropping a key in bathwater, if it's that easy, there is something wrong. There is something askew with that person's way of thinking, way of thought, brain chemistry, whatever you want to do. And there are debates there. And the appropriate thing at that point is to demonize them or to throw them in jail forever. Okay, you can make that argument, but like, they're sick. They have a serious sickness and they made a terrible error. But I think that was sort of where what you were, I guess, trying to portray, that this is something that is, not trying to justify the taking of someone's life, but to sort of show that if you get to, humans can get that dark and get to a place that's, where they're thinking something is completely not what's considered to be of the norm. And this is the reality of mental health. Yeah. And this is why we have to pay attention to it. And just like any disease, like any cancer, any progressive disease, you have to watch it and you have to care for it. Otherwise, it can progress to something like this. Like, did I get that right?
I think you're saying a lot of things that really resonate. And the question becomes about also reducing the stigma at an early age so that someone can feel that they can reach out for help. And that's a big question too, because that's not just about stigma. That's also about certain populations that are marginalized from resources. So that's troubling. But yeah, certainly you're touching on a lot of truths in that book. One of them is that what we think about, we have these colloquial words for mental health, whether it's madness or insanity. People think of it as sort of very disordered thinking. And in a lot of cases, it's profoundly ordered. It's just that order of one's thinking doesn't quite match up with the order of the system around them. So someone can get very caught in their own very airtight system of thinking. This fits here and this fits here. And I think that's what you hear in that book, is that voice he's really lamenting why, when he says it was so easy, I think he's also really lamenting that it was. Why did I not feel that?
Right. Wow. Yeah. I can't believe it was so easy. Why is that like that?
And what is lacking in me in that moment? And in that particular case, you're talking about someone who is speaking this from a state of kind of rising from or coming out of that psychotic state.
I see.
So he has a strange access to what
there's like done. I see what you're saying.
It's
like
in that liminal place.
It's like after
1 foot in this world, whatever that is, and 1 foot in the other world, whatever that is, and they're not entirely mutually exclusive. I found that a very interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and like it's fair. Where I see this a lot. Similar concept is with people with Alzheimer's disease, like advanced Alzheimer's and sort of dementia, where their reality is of something that yours is now no longer. They just can't access certain things. And one of the things you're never supposed to do, same thing with someone who's schizophrenic or in an episode, is try to convince them that what they're doing or saying is wrong. Because to them, it's just what it is. Like they'll repeat the same thing over and over again, or they'll be like, do you know who I am? Do you know who I am? Do you know who I am? And you have to imagine, for somebody that genuinely doesn't know who you are, do you know how upsetting that is to that person? Because they still feel. And so over time, it's like, wow, what are they like, And so it's an approach. It's a, obviously this is a very extreme case, right? But But there's an approach to the way we handle this and treat this that you mentioned other countries do differently. And again, that's a debate, but it's important, especially at this time of year and this month where we're supposed to recognize people who just give up and just end it. It's important that we look out for these things, and we understand that there are different state of minds out there, and it develops over time. It's not just something that happens. It's a slow development. We have to be cognizant of this.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. I mean, it's a good note to kind of come to in this conversation, which is that, many of us have had, sadly, the statistics bear out that almost all of us, almost every one of us has been touched by suicide on some level. I know I have recently with a friend of mine. And I think, all you can do is keep advocating for communication and an attempt to reduce the stigma around whether it's depression or anxiety or the circumstances that lead somebody to that. So, it almost sounds cliche. I hope that it sounds cliche. I hope that we say it so much that it sounds cliche. Talk to one another, break down those barriers.
That's what it is. I agree, man. You got to talk. So let's just, we're going to conclude here, but I want to ask you, and this is the final question. Has anyone ever asked you, this is talking about a cliche. Has anyone ever asked you, like the famous, like if you had to go to an island, you can only take a certain number of books. Has anyone ever done that for you? Like, do you have like off the top of your head, top favorites, or like you're good with any books that you would take? Dude, is there a book you have to have with you?
It depends what day of the week you're asking me. Because it changes so often. I'm the kind of person who will totally fall in love either with a writer or a particular text, and then just maybe move on to something else. But I think my answer would probably be cliche, but I really mean it. I think Hamlet is pretty unlimited.
Mm-hmm.
It's poem unlimited, and I think there's enough in there to
get you going, keep your juices going.
Constantly. I mean, also because, I'll just mention this in passing. I was talking to my students at Columbia about this the other day. I mean, that's a play written, in 1600, and it resonates so much with us now. And one of the reasons it resonates so much is because there's a character. Hamlet is not just, of course, upset about his circumstances. As a matter of fact, that's what Eliot says is wrong with the play, that he's upset about something he can't quite express. And that really is our situation right now. We're upset about something we can't quite express. We can't
Mm-hmm.
quite say. We don't quite have the words for, to quote Hamlet. And I think that is very much part of our, call it an existential dilemma, call it what you want. But I think that play resonates with us now just as much as it ever has, for exactly that reason.
All right. Well, we're going to end it there. Joe, thank you so much, man. You're the best. I appreciate you doing this. He's Joe Fasano, joefasano.net. Check it out. Don't be afraid. Wait, come on. Did I get it wrong, dude? I got the one promo wrong. josephfasano.net. josephfasano.net. I want everybody to check it out because don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to engage. It's really cool. And that book, that Vincent, it's really, really impressive. And I think it'll really get you. So go check it out. Joey, man, I appreciate it. Love you, man. Thank you.
Christopher. Love you too.
All right.
Bye.